1053, 95.3, WDXE.
Hey, that's us, WDXE, AM 1370, 105.3 FM, and of course around the world at WDXE.com. And of course now we are live on Facebook and YouTube. And it's time to welcome in Estate Plan Stan, and he is grabbing a cup of coffee. I told him he had a couple of minutes, and it ended quicker than I thought. So he's on his way back into the studio right now as we speak. And we just got back live. And Stan, you made it just in time. We just did the station ID, and all is well. All is well. Stan Pierchoski with Stan Pierchoski Law, estate planning, bulletproof estate planning, that is, as you know. And we welcome you into the studio, my friend.
Oh, good morning, Jeff. And sorry I got here and I went to reach for my coffee and it wasn't here. And I thought, where's my coffee? And I thought, oh, it's out in the truck. So you said you had 2 minutes. I ran
you had a little longer. You had a little longer journey than you thought.
That's right. That's right.
Well, that's okay. We just had to do a station ID, and I had just introduced the show, so you didn't miss anything.
Oh, good. So you know, I heard the quotes of the day earlier when I was driving over, and I liked the one that said, "History is just a big advance warning."
Yes.
Yeah. And
yes.
we were talking a lot about, a little bit off mic, about little intro music for a show like this. And I do a couple of shows on radios, and I have a song that I use for intro music, and it's the song by the Byrds in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Byrds, Byrds, called "Turn, Turn, Turn," where all the words in that song come from the Book of Ecclesiastes in Scriptures.
Right.
And in Ecclesiastes, it's not in the song, but if you read Ecclesiastes, it talks about there's nothing new under the sun. What has happened will happen again, and what has happened before, or what is happening will come around and happen again.
That's
so
right.
It's a continuous cycle. That's truer words were never said. If you study history, you'll see we constantly, especially mankind, makes the same mistakes.
Yes.
Over and over, and the same result. So when you look at today and what's going on, and you wonder, I wonder how things. I don't know where this world's going. Don't know how it's going to turn out. Well, we kind of do. It's going to turn out just like it did the last time we did exactly what we're doing now. So anyway, I don't know if that's not exactly comforting.
But it's so. But it's true.
Sometimes knowing what's happening is not comforting because what's happening is not always pleasant. So, but anyway, I thought that was an interesting quote. So, all right, hey, this is Bulletproof Estate Planning. I'm your host, Estate Plan Stan Pierchoski from Pierchoski Estate Law, Pierchoski Elder Law, and always want to open this show up by saying we want it to be interactive. I really encourage telephone calls. If you got one, call us at 766-9393. That's 766-9393. Ask a question or share an experience or anything along the line of estate planning. I guess you could call with a question outside of that if you want to know my favorite color or something like that. But if you have a question, don't be shy. That's what I envision this program being, is
Sure.
A lot of question and answers, because that's what I like the most, because it tells me what folks are thinking. It's real life experiences, and if we have these real life experiences that if you've experienced and other people will probably experience, then let's get them out. Let's talk about them. Let's see what's to do about it, or what can be done, or what should be done, or should have been done. So that's what this is about. So, just feel free to ask a question. I know you have them, because this is an area of law where people just have tons and tons of questions.
Absolutely.
And it comes from misinformation. The internet's a wonderful thing, I think, when you're trying to fix your car and you don't know exactly how to do it. But sometimes some topics, there's just maybe too much information where a bulk of it is just not correct. And so this is an area where that is. You can get overwhelmed with the information. You can get distracted on it, and you can get misled. That's one of the problems. That's one of the things we try to deal with, is this misinformation is out there. We deal with it on a daily basis on planning.
Just to kind of maybe introduce or a question for you, and I don't know if you make a question out of this, but this is something that I hear a lot. Of course, being in the real estate business, but I had one of my agents who was going to list a piece of property with this family, and the person he was meeting said, well, the reason they're selling is because his family farm, his dad's family, they're planning on selling him that farm for $1. And I said, why is that? Well, because of this, because they want to make sure that he gets that farm, and this parent is elderly, and they're trying to protect that farm in the future. And I said, you know what? you need to do some talking to an attorney. And I actually mentioned to you that you need to recommend that they talk to somebody about doing better estate planning in that, because I hear that we'll sell you this farm, I'll sell my child this farm, and so you might want to elaborate on that if you want to.
Sure, and it happens all the time. I mean, I hear it a lot, and you know what surprises me, and I guess not at anybody's fault, because this is what tells me people are desperate or thirsty for this knowledge, because people talk about stuff like that.
Right.
Their barber or their buddy guy across the street gives them this advice, and they act on it. And it's not, I mean, you know, it's not always good advice. Now, let's analyze that situation where they got the family farm. Of course, they don't want to lose it; they want to keep it in the family.
Right.
I get the goal. Okay?
Yes.
And they want to salvage it. So, selling it for $1, I mean, that is going to keep the farm. I mean, that when you sell the farm for $1 to one of the children, I suppose.
Yes.
At that moment, when you deed it to that child, it becomes their farm. You have transferred it to that child.
Yes.
Okay. So you essentially have protected it. But there's other stuff that goes with that action, and that is if the elderly person that sold it for $1 it ever gets into long-term care, they're going to see that transaction as being not an arm's length transaction. It's going to be you sold it for less than fair market value.
Yes.
So if it's a farm, I mean, some farms get into the millions sometimes.
Sure.
But let's just say it's like a $500,000 farm, and he sold it for $1.
Yes.
They're going to say that was undervalued by $500,000 minus $1, right?
Right.
And so that's a divestment. You have given that up, and so they can't come and take the property back and jeopardize the farm because they lack the jurisdiction. The farm ownership was complete when it was gifted for nothing, or sold for $1, or sold for something less, or even sold for full value. Once that was done, ownership was complete. So they can't come and take the farm back from the child. What they do is punish the person who sold it for $1. And if you remember a few weeks back, we talked about this thing called the penalty period that's created.
Right.
So now, if that happens and the elderly person stays out of the nursing home for 5 years, then there's never going to be any pushback from that.
Right.
But if they do go in the nursing home within 5 years, and that's usually always the case because that's why people do it. They kind of feel like this nursing home thing is coming down the pike. And if you do it when you're young and you're healthy and you get past the 5 years, that's no problem. They can only look back for that sort of a transaction, or what they call divestment. Divestment means you're giving it up.
Right.
You're not getting anything for it.
Right.
And if they only look back 60 months from the day you apply for benefits. And so if they see that, it's like, well, we can't go take the farm back, but we can create a penalty period, which is a period that we're not going to pay for, or TennCare is not going to pay for, based on the value of what you gave away.
Right.
And we talked about how that looked. The penalty period is the amount of value you gave away. So in this case, it's essentially $500,000 divided by the Tennessee Divestment Penalty Divisor, which it changes from time to time, but what it is right now is $7,090.20 per month. And when you divide those two out, you get an answer in months because the dollars divide out, and that's the engineer in me, sorry.
Yeah.
But you get an answer in months, and whatever that works out to be, if you use a nice round number like 210,000 and round it off to 7,000, you're talking about 30 months. So for a $500,000 farm, you're probably talking more like 60 or 70 months. Okay, you're talking 5 to 7 years. Then they're going to say, okay, seller, we've looked at your application. You're eligible. We're ready to pay. You are TennCare eligible. We're ready to pay for your care. But we're going to impose a penalty period, and we're not going to pay it until the penalty period expires. The minute the penalty period expires, you are eligible. We'll start paying. So they calculate the penalty period. It works out to be 60, 70 months. That's 5, 6 years. And they're going to say, okay, when that expires, we'll pay. Now, that person is in a bind. Because in my opinion, they only got two choices. One, they either private pay. Well, that's a nightmare because if you did nothing at all, you'd qualify in 5 years. And there's no upper limit to the penalty period. I've seen them in the 20s of years when people give away $2 million farms and stuff.
Wow.
There's no upper limit. But after 5 years, you'd qualify by default. Okay. So, but now this person's stuck with a 6-year penalty period, which is more than ever. But anyway, I won't go there. But the thing is, you either private pay, but now it's like, okay, how do I private pay? I've given my stuff away.
Yeah.
Or you just don't get care.
Yeah.
Now that is a harsh penalty. I call it punishment. They call it penalty. I think my term is more descriptive, but that's a bad place to be. So
Yes,
we
it
avoid
is.
that like the plague. Now, so when people say you can't give your property away, you can't sell it for a dollar, the answer is yeah, you can do it, but you really need to know the baggage that comes with that, because it does have consequences, and that's what it is. They a lot of times I'll get that question like this: they'll give a child, I don't know, a piece of property. Child will borrow a couple $100,000 from the bank, build a house, be a couple years into it. Now they're worried, if I go into the nursing home and they see that I gave this to the child, or that my child's got all this money invested, can they come take that property away from him? And the answer to that is no. So rest assured that won't happen. They punish you for giving it to them.
Yes.
That's where it would be a tremendous unfair tort to go after the receiver, because the person that gets it, it's a gift to them. They really don't have any control over that.
Right.
They didn't do anything right, wrong, or indifferent. They were just the recipient. So they
Right.
don't have jurisdiction to do that. But they will come after you and impose this penalty period. That's what the 5-year look back is all about. It's looking to see if you gave anything away.
Right.
I think I started off a week or two ago about a question I had where I had an elderly couple and they wanted to sell their house. And they called me up, scheduled one of my 15-minute calls, and their main question was something along the lines of this. They said, well, we want to sell our house and buy something smaller, but I'm worried if we sell our house, my wife's health isn't too bad, we'll get hit with that 5-year look-back rule. And I said, well, there's no 5-year look-back rule if you sell the house, because if you sell it, you're going to get compensated for it.
Right.
In other words, if you sell a $200,000 house, there's no look back because you've not given anything away. You traded a $200,000 house for $200,000 worth of cash. It is a compensated transfer.
That's correct.
If you give it to it, so when TennCare sees that in the last 5 years, there's no big deal. Why? Now, why is that not a big deal? Because you still have the asset. They don't care if it's a house or $200,000 in the bank or $200,000 worth of gold bars or $200,000 worth of cannabis stocks. You still have the asset, which is something that's available to them for the cost of care. So they don't care if it's a compensated transfer. So you got to wrap your head around this concept. The 5-year look-back rule only looks for one thing, and that is uncompensated transfers, or what I call gifts. The actual legal term is a divestment. You're giving something away for less than fair market value. Now, if you give it away, it's like a zero, but let's say it's a $500,000 farm and you sell it for $250,000. Mm-hmm. They're going to call that a $250,000 gift, a partial gift, because it was undervalued.
Yes.
And I think we talked about that. Suppose you decide you're trying to get rid of money, and so you have your grandson come over and mow the grass, and you pay him $200 an hour. Well, if the going rate is $20 an hour, they're going to consider $180 of that a gift for every hour because you're overpaying somebody.
Right.
Or if somebody has an old clunker that's worth $3,000 and you pay them $15 for it. See, people think of all these things, and I'm telling you, all these things have been thought of before the ink was ever dry on the Medicaid Act and back in the 60s.
There's nothing new under the sun.
There's nothing new. And I get it. And you know where it comes from? It comes from desperation.
Yeah.
Your spouse is going to the nursing home or is there. They hit you with an $8,500 bill a month, and they say, this is going to happen every month. You get out a calculator and your checkbook, and you realize how long you're going to survive at that rate, and you start to panic. I mean, I get it. We call it crisis for a reason. It is an unsettling time. And you're thinking about, I've been working all my life. Both of us, my wife and I were working. We raised these kids. We managed to scrimp and save and buy a house, maybe a second piece of property. I mean, all your stuff, everything you've done in a lifetime of wealth accumulation, whatever that is. But it's a whole lot, a little, or somewhere in between. But it's your nest egg, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's all in jeopardy because somebody has an unfortunate situation of having to require long-term care. And you're worried you have to pay it and lose everything. So it comes from this act of desperation. You start looking for, how can I get rid of this? I'm going to tell you, I don't know. Fortunately, I don't know the name of the attorney that gave this advice, and it's a good thing because I think I might turn them in for malpractice. But I had a client that talked to me, or came to me, and as we started getting into it, the parent was in the nursing home already, and they were advised, she had about $30,000 in a bank account. They said, we took that $30,000 out of the bank account. I said, you did? What'd you do with it? He said, well, we kind of hid it. I said, okay. Why'd you do that? Because we went to an attorney, he told us to do that. I said, no, what did he say? Did he give you a reason why he told you to take it out and hide it? He said, so the nursing home couldn't get it. Now, first of all, the nursing home doesn't take anything. Okay, they don't take your property. If you're in a private pay situation, you can't pay. They just don't let you in, or they'll kick you out
Yes.
if you don't pay the bill. They have no obligation to take care of you if you can't pay. Now, what if you go there and you apply for TennCare, then TennCare pays the nursing home. So there's no scenario where the nursing home doesn't get paid. So they're not the ones that take your property. The people that take your property is the state of Tennessee through the TennCare Act.
Yes.
Now, so to tell somebody, and that's just bad advice, to take it out and hide it. Because now, if you do that, and let's just play this out.
Yes.
People say, well, he's an attorney, he's got to give good advice. Well, maybe I'll talk about that someday, but I don't know if it's a good idea. But let's just play that out. Is that good advice? Okay, suppose we take $30,000 out and we stick it under the bed. We hide it. Now, the next thing is the next natural progression is to file the TennCare application, right? And it's going to ask, do you have any money in the bank? Well, you think you're being smart, and you say, okay, we left $100 in the account. We took out the $30,000, but we left $100 in there. So we report there's $100 in the bank account. What are this 16-page TennCare application is a little bit about medical, but then it's mostly about your income and your assets, your resources.
Assets, yeah.
And so you have to disclose it. And it's asked a lot of questions about that.
Right.
And so you put down, and there's not a question that says how much money's under the bed. So you might think you're being smart and not say anything. If you do that, when you send that TennCare application in, I'm 100% confident you are flirting with TennCare fraud. And TennCare fraud is something they take very seriously. I used to do a lot of criminal defense work. I talked about that on our very first show. I don't do that anymore. But I've dealt with people who have committed TennCare fraud, and they are ruthless. So if you want to have a bad day, you want to have something that's going to ruin your whole afternoon, if not the next 5 years of your life, do something like that. It is just, when you are in a situation where you're trying to get TennCare benefits, it's a full disclosure kind of thing. Yeah. And if you don't, the least that can happen, the easiest thing that would happen is they just deny you benefits because you failed to respond to their informational request.
Yes.
But the worst that could happen is they say you responded intentionally incorrectly, and that's fraud, and that's TennCare fraud. And they turn that over to the enforcement division of TennCare, and those folks are like maybe second to the IRS. They are just really ruthless about what they do.
Well, I completely understand the intentions behind people doing what they're doing.
Absolutely.
They're trying to avoid, their assets being eaten up by long-term health care, which happens to a lot of folks. And so that's what this is all about, because there's ways to do it that are legal, that are protecting your assets, and that's what Bulletproof estate planning is all about.
Wouldn't it be better if there was a way to protect these assets using the laws and the rules and the spousal impoverishment rules and all the eligibility rules that are available to us? And now when they question what happened to this money, we say, okay, let me tell you.
Yeah, you don't have to guess about it.
Yeah, let me tell you. Well, sometimes they'll ask, they'll see, $250,000 taken out of a bank account. They'll say, where'd that go? Well, let me tell you. We purchased a Medicaid compliant annuity and we paid it to the spouse, which is authorized under Section 12, 5.1 of the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005, as adopted by Tennessee in 2006. That's what we did with it. They say, oh, okay, that's allowed. So that's the way you want to do it. You want to say, listen, sure, well, full disclosure, let me show you what we did with it. You don't want to say, I don't know, or I hid it, or no, I guess somebody must have went to Tunica and blew it.
Or try to pretend it doesn't exist.
I get, like you said, I get the motivation.
Yes.
And it's panic.
Yes.
And when you are desperate or panicking, you're not thinking clear. And you just want to act.
Or you've gotten some bad advice.
You don't want to react, you want to act. And so anyway, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I just want to point out that, yes, talk to me or somebody like me before you act on any kind of advice like that.
Yeah.
If your alarm bell should go off when you give anything away, especially if long-term care is foreseeable in the future at all.
Right.
Then be concerned about it. So, well, as long as we're on a sour note like that, or what I guess we call less than great news, one thing I wanted to cover before I picked up where I left off last week, and that is, I guess I don't think this is a big surprise to a lot of people, but it apparently is to some, because I got a call, or I got somebody that came in and talked to me about this, and here they had a husband and wife.
Yes.
And the wife went in the hospital. We're talking about a medical bill, but everything I'm talking about also applies to long-term care because long-term care is considered medical. Okay. So,
yes.
But this was like I don't know, I think it was diabetes or some kind of regular medical illness. And the wife had this problem. And she goes into a hospital, and they tell her they need to do these tests, and she signs the contract, the consent form, and always in that document is who's responsible for payment, right? And
Right.
she puts down herself and says she's responsible. Well, she has this procedure, and it wasn't a whole lot of money. It was a couple $1,000s, but anyway, because of this illness that she had, it rendered her unable to work and unable to pay, essentially. I'm just cutting to the chase. There's a lot more to it, but she couldn't pay. All of a sudden, they came after the spouse. Okay, now, this was a surprise to the spouse. Now, most people feel like, it's my spouse. I'll be glad to take care of him or something. But this spouse said, wait a minute. They actually sued him for it. And they said, the spouse took the defense that, wait a minute, I wasn't there when she signed the contract. She wasn't acting as agent or power of attorney on my behalf, and I never ratified it or approved that she did it. So there's no way I can be responsible for her debt. It clearly was her debt.
Interesting.
She signed the contract. She wanted the procedure. She gave them the green light and consent, and they did it. And now they were going after the spouse. And the question is, how can that be? And another scenario that I'm going to talk about after this is what if they go after your children for your medical bills? Okay. Well, the question is, are you responsible?
Yes.
Well, because we live in Tennessee, we're one of 30 states that the answer to that is yes. Okay. And it's very interesting how that comes about. We have a doctrine called the doctrine of necessaries. The doctrine of necessaries, which is an old common law form of action. Common law means it's not a creature of statute. It means the courts have ruled this is what we do, and throughout precedent and history, they once settled, always settled. So that's what they do. So you can't look up a statute called the doctrine of necessities. There isn't one. It's common law. I once had an attorney say to me, well, there's no such thing as common law anymore. Well, stick with me, in about a minute, you're going to my response is going to be, is that so? But anyway, so I told the fellow, you're responsible, and I thought I would dig up some authority because, I don't like people to think, well, that's just what Stan says. That's just his opinion. Well, it's not my opinion. I give opinions, but I don't give opinions about things like this. I found them in law. And the only reason I like to talk about case law every now and then, I don't want to bore you with a bunch of legal stuff, and I won't. But when I talk about case law, that's very useful because when we know what the courts will enforce or what they'll do or what they won't enforce, that gives us a roadmap of what to do. So, I mean, if somebody fraudulently fills out a 10-care application and it gets to court and the courts say, yeah, this is fraud, and but we know not what to do, right?
Right.
We got sometimes, don't do what the losers do and do what the winners do, and it's a guide. And so I like to keep up with that stuff. Well, this is a classic case, and as I looked into it, there was a case that came out of our appellate court, and it was 1997. And I looked to see if there's anything from then forward, and there's not, which means it's still good law. It's still in full force and effect. And it's on this doctrine of necessaries. And it's called Outpatient Diagnostic Center versus Ralph Christian. And it came out of Davidson County. And actually, the opinion was given by Judge William Koch, who was one of my instructors at law school. This was a year before I even went into law school, but he later on went on to be on the Supreme Court. And but anyway, just to cut to the chase, this was a very similar case. Wife went in and incurred some expenses, and then she couldn't pay it, and so they sued him. Now, this case is a lot about whether or not they carried the burden at summary judgment. I'm not going to go into that, but they get to the end of it, and sometimes a court will have what we call dicta, where they'll just kind of. Normally, a court will only answer the question that you ask. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's a fine art to take an appeal to a court, because I always say an appellate court will give you the exact question to your exact answer to your exact question.
Okay.
Here's an example. I look at you, it's dark in here, and I look at you and I say, Jeff, is there a light switch in here somewhere? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay. I suspect the question should have been, could we get some more light in here?
Yes.
Okay. Or, do you have a watch?
Yes.
I mean, the question probably is, what time is it, right?
Right.
Okay, so you go to court and you say, do you have a watch? And they say, yes. But no, sorry, that's the question you asked. That's the question before the court. That's the question we answer.
Yeah.
So it's an art. Sometimes when they step out of that realm, which isn't often, sometimes we call it dicta, which means it wasn't necessary to decide the case, but they said it anyway.
Yeah.
And this is what they said. It says, we have decided to address briefly the substantive legal issue involved in the case to help them on remand, because that's what they did. They vacated this and sent it back to the lower court. And they says deep. Let me get to it. Okay, deeply embedded in the common law of this state. So that person told me there is no such thing as common law anymore in Tennessee. All right, well, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but common law is good. It works for us. Deeply embedded in the common law of this state is the doctrine that a husband has a duty to furnish his wife suitable support, including medical services, during her life. And they cite a case that goes back into the 1800s. And they say the only exception, okay, now, what's the key word there? Only, right? The only exception to the rule arises in circumstances where a spouse abandons the other spouse without just cause. So if you are married and you've taken your vows for better or for worse, and your wife has, your spouse has medical bills, you're responsible for them. Now, this comes out, the old common law said this was a man's responsibility for a husband, for a wife.
Right.
And don't call in and get mad at me when I say this, but if in history, women used to not be able to own property, they couldn't sign contracts, they weren't responsible for their decisions. They were considered more a liability than an asset. Now, don't get mad at me, that's history, right? But times have changed, and the courts have kept up with it. Now this doctrine is now a mutual support. So a husband is responsible for a wife, and now a wife is also responsible for a husband, because now, the women's rights have changed so much over the last century.
Sure.
So there you have it. I mean, so there's, you have this ability, you don't have to be on the hook or have signed anything or agreed to anything. Now, where this comes up sometimes is when sometimes you have spouses that are estranged. Now, this said abandon. Abandon's a legal word. If you just, I know some couples that come in, they said they've been apart for 20 years. And abandon each other, they still talk to each other, and they just are still married. They just never went through the statutory divorce. That's going to, and they say, well, in one of them, I had one not too long ago, and one of them was looking to qualify for care. And I said, look, this is a problem. Because we have these spousal impoverishment rules that let you shift everything you own to your spouse without having a penalty period. You can give it all to your spouse with no penalty period. That's an exception. But this is not a spouse we really want to give it all to, because we've been estranged for 20 years, right? So I'm not sure I understand what the logic behind staying married if you're not going to conduct yourself as a married couple is, but it creates issues because, especially TennCare. TennCare treats a husband and wife as a marital unit. I don't remember, but I think I went over did I talk about calculating what we call the community spouse resource allowance?
Not that I remember, no.
Well,
no.
Whenever a husband and wife, and one of them goes into long-term care, one of the first things they do is they calculate something called the community spouse resource allowance. The community spouse is the healthy spouse at home, where the institutionalized spouse is the sick spouse that needs care.
Yes.
And the reason I bring that up is because TennCare thinks very much like this doctrine of necessaries, right? And here's why. When you go in, they're going to take everything that the applicant owns in his own name. So if I'm in care, they're going to look at everything I own as Stan Pierchoski, and they're going to consider it a collective asset between me and my wife. And I'm going to say, wait a minute, this is just my bank account. This is my messing around or walk around money. This is my hobby stuff. This is my Home Depot fund. That's what I do for fun. I go to Home Depot and spend money. But this is my money. It's not my wife's. It's mine. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to consider that a collective asset. Then they're going to look at my wife and see what she owns on her own. Okay, and my wife, maybe my wife had her father pass, and she inherited some money from him. It's just hers, right? Right. They're going to say, okay, we're going to put that in a collective pot too. Then they look at everything we own jointly, and everything we own collectively, and put that as a collective asset. They're going to group it all together. And then they're going to divide it in half and say, here's the community spouses and here's the institutionalized spouses. Okay, so that concept of there's no yours, mine, or ours. It's all ours when it comes to TennCare until they split it up. Once they split it up, then now it's community spouses, because that's the rule, and now this is the applicant spouse. So they think the same way. Everything's all considered an asset. And a lot of people come to me and say, my wife's getting ready to go to a nursing home, so I've had the house deeded just in my name. Well, let's think about that. Is that going to buy us anything? Because now the wife applies for TennCare. Right after you apply, you do what we call the CSRA, the CSRA, Community Spouse Resource Allowance. And they're going to consider everything the husband owns, which is now the house only in his name, collectively, which it was collected before he put it in his name.
Right.
So you've not gained anything.
Right.
It doesn't do any good to start deeding property to the healthy spouse. You can deed property to the healthy spouse, but not before you apply. You do it after you apply. That's when we're allowed to do this and divide it up. Now we don't have to deal with the half that belongs to the applicant spouse. Those are the spousal impoverishment rules. We give the spouse some of the money so that that's not available for the other spouse's cost of care. And so they have something to live off of.
Right.
And that comes out of our Deficit Reduction Act, our Catastrophic Illness Act. Those are rules we're allowed to do. So this is what this is how you protect the real estate rather than selling it to your kid for $1. I mean, that's a reason. Okay, so now to move on with this case, I talked about by the parent, a spouse being responsible for the other spouse. It gets worse. It gets worse, yes and no. Tennessee is one of 22 states out of 50 that has what we call filial responsibility laws.
Okay.
Filial, filial responsibility. And what that means is your children can be sued for your medical expenses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And these are older laws. Some states never had them. Some states have repealed them. We have not. They're still in full force and effect now. That's the bad news. They can sue you. And now the good news, I don't know if it's good news, but the better news is they're rarely enforced. Now, what I have kept up with those, and I've found every time it was ever done in Tennessee, and it's not too many. But the thing I noticed in Tennessee is the times they have enforced those is when it was pretty egregious. Meaning, the person that got the medical bill was of means.
Yes.
And somehow they transfer it to the kids, and the kids have more than enough to pay for it, and then they just refuse to pay for it.
Yes.
And so, I mean, is that right, wrong, or indifferent? I don't know. But those are the kind of things that got their attention because it was almost like an organized way to not pay the bill. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Now, if you just can't pay it and your kids, they have something. But the real problem is the books are still, the laws are active. Just because they don't use them doesn't mean they can't use them.
Right.
And that's not a defense to say, well, listen, you hardly ever use these things. Why you can't use it on me? Well, no. If it's an act of law, if you want the legislature, if you want them to not have these laws to use, then get the legislature to repeal it. But if they're on the books, they can use them. And what I did see was they used them more in the last 5 years than they did in the 20 years before that. Mm-hmm. So what's that tell you? Mm-hmm. Some of the ones I've seen were nursing home suits. Yeah. So unfortunately, this business about, just saying, well, I'll just make myself judgment proof or I'll make myself indigent and, you can't get blood from a stone. So, and they have to take care of me. They can't just leave me on the street. Well, there's a lot of sleeping issues in there that will thwart that plan. That's not a good plan. So, just protect the property. There's ways to do it. You have to do some of the planning that we do, but the very good news of all this is you can protect literally 100% of what you own. If you're married, we can protect 100%. If you act with a few years to work with, we can always protect virtually everything, especially all your big ticket items like your house, the real estate, the things that have tremendous value. We can protect all that stuff. There's ways to do it. There's legal ways to do it. And again, I think this is kind of where I left off last week, and where I talked about the fact that we talked about what we called countable assets, remember? And I posed a few questions like, okay, well, the TennCare Act says you got to have less than $2,000 of countable assets. I think I'm probably repeating myself, but I think it's important. And I made the comment that, well, if countable assets, if you look at the statute, countable assets is a category. These assets are countable. So the question comes up, are there other categories? And the answer is, yeah, there's non-countable assets. And there's actually several categories that are called non-countable assets, quite a few, 5 or 6. So I brought up the question. I said, well, if I have countable assets, can I also have non-countable assets?
Right,
sure.
exactly.
And then the next question is, okay, if I have countable assets, can I convert them to non-countable assets? So if I have $500,000 of countable assets, if I try to apply for TennCare, they're going to say, what? Sorry, you're $498,000 over-resourced, right? Got too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can I convert that 498 to a non-countable asset? And the answer is yes, which is this is how you protect property, because the only category that the TennCare Act requires you to be below a level in is countable.
Right.
So the whole concept of this TennCare planning or crisis planning is converting countable to non-countable. And that's, we spent a couple of weeks talking about the asset protection trust, the income-only asset protection trust. When you put property in that, that's exactly what you've done. You've made it, take a countable asset, you put your home, the family farm, your big investment accounts into this thing. The moment they went in there, you turned them into a non-countable asset.
Okay.
And when I say countable, sometimes that word's not very descriptive. So you can probably substitute the word available.
Right.
Available for the cost of care.
Right.
So money in the bank. You have $50,000 in a bank account. That's certainly available, and so that's countable. Well, what if we took the $50,000 and bought a Lexus? I mean, a non-countable asset is one vehicle you're allowed to have. That's a very simple and trivial example of converting a countable asset to a non-countable asset.
Right.
So that's what we talked about that last week. So this whole concept of converting these assets is exactly what planning is all about in the simplest Reader's Digest version of it. The whole view is manipulating. It's called spend down. Spend down is the process of not spending money. It's the process of converting your non-countable assets to countable assets. And there's quite a few different ways to do that. And that's sort of where we were heading as last week and the week before, I think, as we move into crisis planning and all the different strategies that are available. And that's sort of where I left off, and that's where I think I'll pick up, because I just wanted to cover those the bad news on that case law and the doctrine of necessaries and the filial responsibility. But we don't have to worry about any of that.
Yep.
If we protect our assets, we're paying for our bill, or TennCare is paying for our bill.
Right, exactly.
And all properly.
Yeah.
Because that you're expected to you're kind of expected to shift it to the third-party state. That's what TennCare is for. This program is for a reason. And so that's why it rises to the level of an entitlement. You are entitled to TennCare benefits. Now, even though just because you're entitled doesn't mean you go down and knock on a door and say, look, I've been paying TennCare all my life, so I want you to pay for my nursing home care. And you still have to go through the process of becoming eligible. And
Yes.
that's what we're talking about. Being income eligible and being asset or resource eligible. Income is what it sounds like, income, and then assets are stuff that you own. That's where we spend most of our time, income and asset eligibility. So we're talking about crisis where somebody's actually in the nursing home. A couple of the very fundamental things we can do is exactly that. We can take countable money and spend it on non-countable assets, like personal property. You can buy personal property because there's no limit on how much personal property you can own. You
Right.
can as much as you want. Now, this is kind of limiting because you don't want, if you got a couple $100,000, you don't want to buy. Yeah, I mean, you can buy, you can upgrade your furniture. You can buy all new appliances. You
Right.
can do stuff like that, get new clothes and stuff. But it's I wouldn't go crazy with that because, I mean, if you need it, do it. But I wouldn't go crazy because if your goal is to maybe have money to leave to your kids,
Yes.
if you buy new furniture and say, okay, I'm going to leave all this furniture to my kids.
That's a
I mean,
diminishing
now
asset.
it's secondhand furniture, and it's really not worth much, right? And there's better ways. Now, the only caveat to this buying personal property is if you buy something that they consider to be investment grade.
Yes.
So if you buy gold bars, okay, they're going to say, well, that's investment grade. That's not. It is personal property, but now they rarely get into that because I've known people that had stamp collections, they've had memorabilia that was $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 worth of value. They really don't. I've never seen them bat an eye much at that. But if
Sure.
it was something just $100,000 or more, I think it might get their attention.
Sure.
So, now let's play this out because when you purchase personal property, a couple things come into effect. It's just not as simple as buying it. Let's say you decide to buy a $100,000 diamond necklace.
Yeah.
Okay, it's personal property, right? Now, how do they know that it's investment? Or I mean, in other words, if they saw you bought a $100,000 diamond necklace, it's my bet they'd consider that investment grade. Okay. Now, how do you think? Okay, how would they find out? Well, if you go through the 16-page application, it never asks you about personal property. Not a single question. I'm familiar with every question on there, and there's not one. And so you don't. Okay. So how does that work? Well, now this 5-year rule comes into play, because remember I said the 5-year look-back rule begins the day you file the 10-care application.
Yes.
And when you file the 10-care application, you've given them the right to look into your financial history for 5 years, for 60 months. So here's how that would work. Let's say 3 years ago you bought this $100,000 diamond necklace so you could get rid of $100,000. You thought that'll hold value and I can just leave that to my kids, and now they pretty much can sell it, and it'd be pretty much a wash, or it might even be more valuable.
Right.
And the plan sounds good. Now, it can be good, but now a couple things come into play. And now you're filling out the 10-K application, you're thinking, oh, shoot, if I got to tell them about that necklace. And then you get to the last page, and they never did ask me about any personal property.
Yes.
Well, remember, when you give them the application, they look back 5 years. Now, one of the things they're allowed to do is ask you for 60 months of bank records. So they don't always ask for all 5 years, but they can.
Yes.
So let's assume they're going to. I don't like to assume they're going to do something other than what they can do. Let's prepare for the worst and settle for something less than it. So let's assume they ask for these 5 years of bank records, and they see somewhere a $100,000 withdrawal from your bank account.
Right.
They are going to ask about it, okay? And when they ask about it, if you don't give them an answer, or duck and weave and just beat around the bush, they're going to say, okay, we're going to deny your application for failure to respond to an informational request. You can't play hide the ball with these guys.
Right.
I mean, you can, and if you hide the ball, they're just going to say, okay, denied. And the whole thing we're trying to do is get approved, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to see that, and they're going to ask, and you have to tell them, and when you tell them, that now they're going to know about it. So, that's how they find out about it. But if you did it 61 months ago, it's outside their jurisdiction to do anything about it. Okay, now, so you can do that, but then this 5-year look-back rule comes into play, even though there's no limit on personal property, and they don't even ask about personal property. But they can find out about personal property if you start shuffling money around. So there's a lot goes on. So when you go to your barber and he gives you advice, I mean, it's very superficial. It's usually not right, but there's more to it than just that. So that's a situation where that can come back and.
I think people have good intentions. They're basing their advice on maybe their experience, but as you and I have talked about before, every circumstance in every state has different nuances. They're different. Different circumstances.
Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying people are trying to cheat the system. It is like I said, I think it's kind of a desperate attempt to do something. Because people get angry. They don't want this money to go to the cost of care because they've already paid for this. And they're just kind of desperate on what to do. And they look for knowledge. They look for what they can do, and they can't find it.
Right.
Which is why I do these radio shows. This is a way to at least know what options are. I'm not trying to teach you how to do some of this stuff. I mean, I'm not going to live long enough to teach you how to do all this stuff.
Well, you don't have to know all this stuff. You have people like you that do know.
That, and you need to know the concept.
Yes.
So when someone tells you need to hurry up and start giving your property away because your wife is getting ready to go to the nursing home, I want that to set off an alarm bell in your head. Mm-hmm. Say, I've heard where that's not quite right. I'm going to thrash that out before I actually do anything.
Right.
So that's the whole purpose, is get the concepts out there, and the fact that you have options. There are options. We can save that property without giving it away. And there's even some strategies where we intentionally give stuff away, intentionally invoke the penalty period, because there's a way we can make the penalty period work for us. Yeah. So there's a lot of cool things that we really do. This concept of buying personal property, you can do that, but I think it's it's kind of a fundamental thing you can do. So if you need a furniture upgrade, or another thing we can do is home improvements.
Yeah.
You can modify your home. So if you need like ramps, you can have those put in.
Yeah.
If you need, and really the only real criteria we got to satisfy is reasonably necessary. That's a pretty wide. You're painting on a blank canvas with a pretty big brush,
Yeah.
Reasonably necessary. Now, let's say if you decide to do this and all your floor trim and all your chair molding is made out of gold.
Right.
A little hard to justify, right? But for the most part, you can do all kind of modifications.
Yes.
So if you have a $100,000 home and you do $80,000 worth of stuff, that's not cost effective either. So, but there's a way to move some money, and you're getting something for it that you need, or your spouse needs.
Yes.
Because you're in the nursing home, you're doing renovations for the spouse. You put an addition on the home, you are adding value to the house. So it's not a bad way to spend money, but I think it's limited. We don't want to move tons and tons that way because it's there's better ways to do it. But if the shoe fits in a way, so if you need a new air conditioning unit, it's a $10,000 unit, that's something we can spend it on that's not going to raise any eyebrows. But again, in the big picture, what are we doing? We're taking countable assets, which is money in the bank, and converting it to a non-countable asset. Once we do that, it's not available for the cost of care.
Right.
Now you can even buy a new home. You're in the real estate business. Suppose, and here's the advantage of doing something like this. Although, if let's say somebody has a $100,000 house.
Yes.
And all said and done with, they have $400,000 in other assets that are available. So they essentially have got this $500,000 worth of countable assets because the house is considered countable.
Right.
Okay? But it's a $100,000 house. So they sell the $100,000 house and they get $100,000 for it. They take the other $400,000 that they have and they buy a $500,000 house. Okay, what have we done? We have converted all our countable assets to non-countable into the house. I mean, the house is countable, but it's a excluded asset. Don't get confused with that. For now, let's just think of it as non-countable.
Okay.
It is technically countable, but it can be exempt or excluded. And as a married couple, it's excluded. So it's kind of out of the equation. So let's not get confused with that. But so what they've done was they've immediately made the spouse that's in the nursing home, they've accelerated their eligibility. They don't have any countable assets now because we took them all and spent them on the house. So we got rid of them. We spent them down on a conversion, and now they're instantly eligible. And now we got the $500,000 house. So that's another example, and that one can be done. Except for people like us, they're baby boomers, or the mindset is more like in your retirement years, you more want to downsize and rather than upsize.
Yes.
So, and it runs, people who scrimped and save all their lives, and sometimes they're not just willing to just blow a lot of money into something like that for a plan to, just to put the assets in a different category.
Right.
But it is a strategy, and you can see how it works. And you can see how it works pretty well.
There's just so many ways.
And I've only, stay tuned because we've only scratched the surface. These are the basic, easy, fundamental things that we look at and say, do any of these make sense? And some of them do, and often none of them do, these simple ones. Yeah. Now we say, okay, let's do some of the ones where we can move some real money and save some real money and keep it with the family and get into saving these $1 million farms and the high-priced real estate, all that. So don't have much time to really get started with that, so I'll pick up on that next week. But this concept of, I hear often people say, all right, Aunt Gertrude's in the nursing home. They want $8,500 a month. We're just SOL. I mean, she's going to lose everything. They're going to take it all. We're just going to have to pay it. There's nothing we can do. It's just forget it. And they're just downtrodden. They're what's the word I'm looking for?
Really desperate.
Desperate. Destitute, I think is what I was looking for. And their mental state is just down in the dirt. They're sad. They're defeated. There's just nothing we can do. And that's the mindset. And that's the misinformation that's out there. There's a lot of things we can do. Tons. I got a phone call waiting for me when I get back to the office on somebody who, with that's why I'm using that as an example, that very mindset that called me from, maybe it was in this radio show, but that's exactly what we're going to talk about because they were under the impression, they already figured out how long the assets are going to last.
Right.
And it's not long. And they heard me say something like, it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be that way. We can save it all.
Yeah.
We can even save property after you're qualified and eligible for TennCare. They take, let's say you have a $500,000 house, right? Well, the limit in Tennessee is $688,000, which is a pretty expensive house.
It is.
So if you have a $500,000 house, you can still hang on to that house, and they won't use it against you for eligibility purposes. Mm-hmm. You can exempt it. Mm-hmm. I don't like exempting property because if you exempt it, they've just you put an exempt column. So you've taken $500,000 out of countable assets. So you lowered your countable assets by $500,000, and you put it in the exempt column. And they say, okay, now you're eligible. We'll pay. And so you're paying, and you're in a nursing home for 3 years, 4 years, and you pass away. Now, when you pass away, they're going to come after your estate. Now, remember that $500,000 house. It didn't go anywhere. You still own it. They just didn't use it against you for the eligibility process.
Right.
But now they're going to exercise the 10-Care Estate Recovery Act and come after the house because you still own it.
And this is what we see.
That's why I don't like exempting property, because it's just, people say, sometimes the nursing homes tell people that the house is a protected asset. Well, I don't know if the protected asset is really the word. It's more of a deferral. They're going to get it. They're just going to wait till later.
Yes.
And God bless them, if you have a spouse living in the home, they won't take it till after they pass away. But they'll come and
There's
get
such a thing as a 10-care release during this deal.
There's 10-care release. Whenever they say we don't have a claim anymore, they'll file a 10-care release. But if you have real estate, they are going after it because they can always recover from real estate. So I don't like this concept of exempt. So I'd rather. So we have people can go into care and have a house, $250,000 house.
Yeah.
Well, we can sell the house. Now, thing is, when you sell the house is exempt. Say you got a $250,000 house.
Yep.
The house is exempt.
Yep.
The $250,000 you get when you sell it is not.
Yeah.
Okay, the personal residence is what's exempt. So they're already qualified for 10-Care. We can sell the house. We can take the money and spend it on a Medicaid-compliant annuity with a gift strategy, and we can salvage it. And still maintain our eligibility in care. So there's
pretty amazing.
I mean, and it sounds like, well, are these some kind of tricks you're doing? No, these are things we're allowed to do.
These are legal things to do.
I mean, we do them a lot. They work like a champ.
Well, before we run completely out of time,
Yeah, we're getting close.
we need to get your contact information, and you've got a seminar coming up too, right?
Oh gosh, that is kind of why I do this radio program.
That's right. I'm here to help.
I get so into it, I completely forget. Yes, let me go over that quickly. I have a seminar coming up. It's Saturday the 29th, so it's 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Yes.
It's on the square in Pulaski at the Star Theater.
Yes.
And it's at 10 o'clock. Will's Trust in the Nursing Home. We don't get this deep in this stuff, but it gives you a lot of options.
Right.
Come to that. Call the office at 931-363-7222 and tell them you want to come to that. Walk-ins are welcome. I just like to get a head count so we got enough tables and chairs up and stuff like that. Or if you have a question about this, call me, 363-7222, or go to my website, estateplanstand.com, and you can ask a question that way. Real quickly, I got to tell you this, or my wife will put me in the doghouse. My wife and I are very heavily involved with the Star Theater that we have the seminar at next one.
Yes.
Right next to my office, Community Theater.
Yes.
Tonight is opening night of a musical they've been working so hard on. It's called Newsies.
Oh yeah.
It's about the Newsboys strike of 1899, and it's the kids. I think they're. They're kids, but they're young adults in it too and stuff.
Yeah.
They've done a great job, and I did a lot of set building on that. It was pretty challenging at times, but they've done a wonderful job. And tonight's opening night, so it's tonight. It's Friday night, Saturday night at 7 o'clock, and then there's a 2 o'clock matinee Sunday.
Awesome.
Then next week it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 3 nights
Is
next
this
week.
at the Star Theater?
Yes, it's at Star Theater.
Okay,
it's
great.
a live show. So you can call my office or go to startheater.com and you can get tickets. I mean, they're selling fast, but there's still some available. So,
Right.
So again, call me at Pierchoski Estate Law, Pierchoski Elder Law. If you want to talk about anything that I talk about, at 363-7222. Or like I say, go to estateplanstand.com and you can call me, email me, look at my calendar, whatever.
Right. What's that phone number again, Stan?
363-7222.
Estate Plan Stand, everybody. Always interesting. Always learn something. Can't wait till next time.
Yeah, we'll see you next.
We'll do it again.
We'll see you next Friday at 8 o'clock for Bulletproof Estate Planning.
God bless, Stan.
Thank you.
This is WDXE, W287AA, and W237FD Lawrenceburg. Broadcast services of Prospect Communications.
I'm Chris Foster, Fox News. He's suspected of murdering women on Long Island, New York. Fox's Tanya J. Powers.
The investigation started in 2010 when a woman's body was found along Gilgo Beach, which is just outside New York City. By spring of 2011, the number of bodies found had climbed to 10 and included 8 women, an unidentified man, and a toddler. The New York Post reports that the man who was arrested is being looked at in connection with the so-called Gilgo 4, women who were found wrapped in burlap within days of each other in 2010.
Police have not yet publicly identified